Welcome everyone to ExploreMedTech Innovation Seminar by the MedTech Talent Accelerator Program. Before we start, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory. The dish with one spoon is a treaty between Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Our esteemed speaker today is Dr. Byron Olsen. This presentation will share key concepts to consider when working for a small company. Dr. Olsen is an expert at working as a biomedical engineer in small companies with a team of only 1 to 100 individuals. Dr. Olsen was formally trained in mathematics and bioengineering. His work focuses on the intersection of physiological sensors and machine learning. Throughout his career, Dr. Olsen has made advancements in data science, clinical data collection, sensor design, and algorithm development at a variety of startups in the wearable and medical device spaces. Without much delay, I would like to over to you, Dr. Olsen.
All right, thank you very much for that nice introduction. So welcome, everybody. I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you about working at a small company. I know that when I was in graduate school, I didn't hear much about people who worked at small companies. You'd hear people who worked at really large companies, and you'd hear about people who worked at, startups that had 2 people or were sort of a grant-driven company, but never really people who had a lot of experience working at small companies. And part of that was because at the time you viewed regulatory bodies like FDA or Health Canada as these giant organizations that you need a giant company to take on to build a device or to build a product. But that's really not what I've experienced in my life. So I'm here to talk about working at small companies. A quick disclaimer. I'm going to talk to you about my experiences and what I've seen and what I've done. I'm one person.
Whenever I am.
Oh, okay. I'm one person. Lots of people have different experiences. I will try to let you know what I understand and what I know. But remember, that's my opinion, and you'll have to decide for yourself what's correct for you. I'm happy to talk about almost anything. Obviously, there are some confidences that I have to keep, but I will try to talk to you openly and honestly about my experiences working at small companies. I'm a bioengineer, biomedical engineer, whatever you want to call that. I'm not an HR expert, a lawyer, tax professional, etc. I will share with you my experiences as a bioengineer, and I can tell you everything about those aspects of my career, but I can only share what I've seen in other areas. And of course, the world is constantly changing. What would have been good strategies for me 15 years ago are not good strategies for me today, and may not be good strategies for you. And I will also caveat that my experiences are primarily based in the United States that may or may not apply to you. But I'm here to share with you what I know and what I've experienced. So let me just tell you a little bit about how I got to speaking in front of you today. I did my undergraduate work in mathematics, and I did my PhD in bioengineering. I loved being a bioengineer. I love that my day started with training animals. I would also do surgeries. I would do hardware development, software development. I would make everything happen within the lab. And we got to think a lot about how we could build technologies to actually help people live better lives. My grandfather had a farming accident when he was about 16 years old, and he lost his leg. And that deeply influenced me as a child, thinking about how hard it was for him to just get around with that artificial leg. And, he wore an artificial leg for 70 something years of his life. And that was, it really affected it. And I saw how it affected him. And this is something that I wanted to do with my skills to make life better for people like my grandfather. So, like I said, I went through graduate school, did some postdocs, and then all of a sudden I saw a company that was advertising. I didn't, again, know that there were a lot of these small businesses out there that were working in the med tech space, and that company was called Verilight. And they were looking for an engineer who sounded a lot like me to go in and work with them on algorithm development for a device to screen for diabetes. And I thought, this seems pretty cool. I should try this. I don't know anything about it. I don't know what it's like. I actually had a very small child, and my wife was very pregnant at the time, so it was maybe a little bit of a risky move, but we packed up and we moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I started working for a company called Verilight. Now, Verilight at the time was in the middle of a clinical trial. Again, not something that I thought a small company like this could pull off by themselves, collecting data to try to screen people for diabetes and prediabetes using a fluorescence imaging device. Now, in graduate school, I worked primarily with electrical signals. I didn't know a lot about imaging or optics at all, but I learned very quickly. And really, while I thought I was going there to show them my exciting machine learning skills, one of the first problems I actually had to solve was not at all about machine learning. It was about how to convince people that we were doing the right thing. As the company went out and collected data in the field, they didn't really expect the problem that they were solving to be so hard. They thought they could collect hundreds of people's worth of data, apply their canned algorithms to it, and would pop out an answer that would be good enough to go into a pivotal trial with the FDA. What we found was that it wasn't good enough. And when things aren't working at a small company or a large company, a lot of people want to help and come in and tell you that they think they had solved it. And so as a young engineer, not knowing how to say no, not knowing really how work works, I would have people knock on my door and tell me, hey, I think I've got this solved. I've worked this out on my, my version of MATLAB on my desktop, and see, when I take this data and I plug in this algorithm, it works every single time. And so I spent most of my days trying to figure out what they had done to do this wrong so that they got the good answer that they thought they had. And I quickly realized that what I had to do was build a system so that everybody felt like their solutions were being evaluated fairly, and that we could actually choose the best solution out of the bunch of solutions that were being proposed. So it wasn't a machine learning problem per se. It was a problem about convincing a group of people that we were hearing them, we were listening to them, and we were coming up with a fair way to evaluate their solutions. Not something I was trained for, but a skill that was really valuable nonetheless. And it turns out that once we were able to do that, once we were able to bring discipline in, once we were able to convince people that we knew how to get from where we are to where we needed to be, we could actually build those algorithms. And we shipped this device internationally in 2 different versions. In fact, fun story is that our first license was actually a Health Canada license. And my first actual approved device was through Health Canada. So it always holds a special spot in my heart for Health Canada, and Verilight was that company. So Verilight was sold. I will talk to you towards the end about what that means and how you should evaluate job offers when you're understanding that these companies were built to be sold or acquired. Verilight was sold, and I quickly tried to figure out how we took the lessons that we learned at Verilight to actually turn what was a problem that wasn't being solved into a solved problem to help other companies. Verilight had been spun out of a small company called InLight Solutions. They were trying to do non-invasive glucose sensing. I happened to be the last employee of InLight Solutions, as they had, just a little bit of money in the bank. They still had a board of directors. They still had a lot of corporate structure. They had been a huge company, and I was their last employee while we were trying to figure out how we take this technology and go elsewhere. I then worked with a former C-level person from Verilight to try to start another consulting company that was called Medici Technologies. That was very challenging. I will talk more about how challenging it is to start a 2-person company over a 1-person company in a minute, but that was very challenging. And then I went off and started my own consulting company called Biotech. I was really fortunate to have a lot of good contacts in the field, and I made a reasonable reputation for myself working at Verilight, and was able to work with a lot of early stage wearable companies, including Basis, which was actually the first optical heart rate sensing wearable on the market, and many others, in helping them solve that same problem. They had a technology in the lab, they took it out, they got some money, they built their first really exciting device. They think that those same things that worked in the lab are going to work when they go to new people, and it just doesn't. And they're running out of time and patience, and there's usually an interpersonal conflict. And I would come in, and later myself and people that I hired in would come in and would help them figure out where their product actually is at that time, and to figure out a plan to collect the right data, build the right algorithms, and move forward. Eventually, working for 3 or 4 startups full time became a lot, and my wife convinced me that I should probably wind that down. So I took a role with one of the companies that I've been consulting with called BSX Athletics. When I first met BSX Athletics, they were in that same position. They had a prototype device that they thought was awesome. They actually had run a Kickstarter, which is in today's world sounds a little bit crazy, to fund a device, and it wasn't working at all. And so I came in and we did a little bit of redesign on the sensor. We recollected all the data. We figured out what kind of data we needed. We figured out how we could parameterize the problem properly. And we launched a successful device for them. I think only 1 month past their originally promised date, which at the time was pretty amazing for a Kickstarter. That product later got picked up by several cycling and triathlon teams worldwide. There were several external trials that were done that we had no part of that actually showed that it was better than the technology that we had used to build the algorithms, which is always fun. So they said it was better than a finger stick lactate sensor. And I thought, that's odd, because we built all of this product using finger stick lactate sensors to gather the data, but that was really successful. BSX then went off and formed a new company called Level. Level was then acquired by Gideon, and about that time, the pandemic hit and everybody was looking for new work. I happened to land with a great company out of Belgium called Bloom Life. Bloom Life had a wearable device on the market that was used to monitor contractions to help mothers who are at home figure out roughly whether their contractions were proceeding and they were likely to be moving towards labor, or if that was false labor. It was designed by 2 dads, a very successful group of 2 that started this company that said, hey, it's no fun to go to the hospital and find out that all of your labor is false. There should be a technology solution, and they developed this. Now, unfortunately, they got a letter from the FDA that said, hey, this isn't a wearable, this is a medical device. And they hired in a group of experts to come in and help turn a wearable into a medical device. And I led the algorithm group to work on what I believe now is called Belly, which is a small wearable sensor that allows women to do non-stress tests at home, measuring fetal heart rate and contractions, and is a medical device. And it was a fun technology to develop during the early days of the pandemic, because the use case was exactly somebody doing this at home. So we could drop off sensors, drop off electrodes, and have a person actually attach it. And it was a sort of trial by fire, and it was exciting. While working for Bloom Life, I got a call from a recruiter for a company called Bigfoot. Fun fact, I'd applied to Bigfoot several times and they had never heard of me when the recruiter picked me up. I talked to them, and a little over 2 years ago, I came in as their head of computational sciences. I run, algorithm development, data science, and data engineering. And Bigfoot was a company that when I joined had 1 user, now has on the order hundreds of users, and we were recently, as you may have seen, purchased by Abbott because of our innovative solutions in the diabetes management space. So when I say I've worked at all different sizes of companies in medtech, this is what I mean. There's all kinds of companies on here and all kinds of different sizes. So what does it mean? What are some of the pluses and minuses of working in medtech? And by the way, if you have a question at any point in time, I believe you can raise your hand and I can see it. If not, we'll definitely get your questions at the end. So what are the opportunities that you can work in medtech? I mentioned all the ones that I've worked with. What are sort of some common patterns we see there? So there's obviously the size 1 company. And the size 1 company is an independent consultant. This is a very common thing that people in medtech do, especially after a successful company, either between jobs or because they no longer want to work in a high stress environment. They'd rather pick and choose their opportunities. I really enjoyed working at a size 1 company before I actually hired people. There are lots of pluses in terms of how you set your time, how you know that every single thing you do is likely a billable thing, and so it has value directly to you. You can say no to any opportunity that's out there or yes to it without having to consult anybody. You just do what you want to do and you don't do what you don't want to do. The negatives, of course, are that you have to do the work and drum up the business. That can be very stressful, especially if those jobs are cyclical. Most of the jobs that I took as a consultant were very like 3 to 4 month term jobs where I would work crazy hours on them. That was good in terms of bringing revenue into my family. That was bad in terms of being able to pursue new jobs or next jobs. And so I'd go through big cycles of being super busy and then panic that I had no work. And then all of a sudden, 3 or 4 weeks later, I'd be back in this super busy cycle. That would wind down and I'd panic. And so it took a lot of discipline to be able to deal with that cycle. On paper, it was really easy to see that that wasn't a problem, that the revenue was all good, but psychologically that was hard for me because I value working and I like to work, and that made it very difficult. I always took my laptop on vacation with me. My kids will tell you that. They don't like that, but that was my choice. I could have chosen not to do that, but that was, again, hard for me not to do. I was very flexible. I worked on all different kinds of problems. I got exposed to all different types of technology, and I got to work with many different people in many different disciplines. So I wasn't, put into one box, which was nice. And in terms of career path, it exposed me to a lot of people. It allowed me to build a network so that later, if I did not want to be a consultant anymore, I would have an opportunity to move out. And in fact, what I did was eventually close down my consulting practice and have the people who work for me, wind down their time with me, and I moved on to one of the people that I consulted for. So size 2 is actually the hardest jump in this chart. You go from having basically nobody to answer to having one other person to answer to, and that's a jump from 0 interpersonal interactions to 1, and that's an infinite jump, unfortunately. This is the hardest type of business to get off the ground. Partnerships are a typical example here, where 2 people come together with either similar or very different, like complementary skills. It seems like it's going to work, but one of the things that you'll find, and one of the things I found not only in my interactions this way, but in other people's interactions, is that both parties are always going to think that they're doing all the work, and oftentimes both parties are working very hard, and it's really hard to come together on those things. Where I've seen this be very successful are grant-fed businesses. So in the US, for sure, we have a lot of spin-out companies that are on small business innovative research grants or technology transfer grants, and they are very successful at getting those grants in the door, producing the results, getting another grant in the door, producing those results, and that works really well for a size 2 business. Another example that I think is very successful there is the sort of classic Silicon Valley startup where you have a CEO and CTO. CEO is outside the business, trying to sell the business, trying to get money in the door, and the CTO is home, building the technology, making that work. Bloom Life is an example of a company like that. Again, 2 dads that sort of share those 2 roles and were able to be successful. Excuse me, but they had to grow that business for that business to overall be successful. I think that size 2 seems like a perfect midpoint, and it actually turns out to be one of the more challenging businesses to be successful. The size 10 to 20 is my favorite type of business to work in. These are small companies that have a single product and they have a singular focus. When you can bring together 10 to 20 people that all have different skill sets, that all have different areas of expertise that they can work on one product together, you get a lot of really good synergy, a lot of really good energy, and you can really do some amazing things. The biggest output for the smallest group of people I've ever been a part of has been with companies of this size. There are negatives we'll talk about in a minute, but I think that this is really the sweet spot of small companies in medtech. And then the last sort of small company that you can see in medtech are size 100 companies. And these size 100 companies really have 2 flavors, either larger consulting companies where you have enough regular work that you can get a lot of people in, they can be paid salaries, and they can really focus on addressing more and more problems, or aspiring large companies. So a company that's had some initial success at a smaller scale and is trying to build out so that they could take on either a new product line or a new business area or do more, sell the product, for example. There's not a lot of salespeople usually in a size 10 to 20 company. So these are the sort of typical examples of companies that are small scale in medtech. And they all have lots of advantages and disadvantages. So some great things about working for small tech companies. One of the things that I've always loved is that small companies definitely value getting things done. If you're in a small company and you're able to show results and sit down and solve problems, you're going to be highly valued. It's not really about how you play the game or how you figure out your career ladder. It's about getting things done. And it actually feels pretty good to have accomplishments on a regular basis, and you can value your work, you can understand its importance, and you get a lot of things done. And so that's a great part about working for small medtech companies. Flexible working conditions are another typical example of something that happens at a small medtech company. I have been a remote employee since 2010. That was an opportunity where I said, we need to move closer to extended family. We had young kids. And I told actually my company that I was going to be moving and taking another job. And they said, wait, don't do that. Let's figure out a solution. And so since then, actually, with two small exceptions, I've worked remotely and commuted periodically to the job site when needed, and ran most of my job function remotely. It doesn't work for every example of what you'd want to do in a small medtech company. If you're not going to have a wet lab at home. I've worked at companies where people had electronics labs at home, etc. But you're not going to be handling samples at home, or doing animal work at home, or even doing human work at home. But flexible working conditions are usually a part of that, and figuring out how you attract the best people and allowing them to have a reasonable work-life balance or a reasonable accommodation for what's going on are pretty typical, because those companies are going to value you as a person more than how you need to interact with them as a worker. Another great thing that I found is there's a lot of variety of tasks. I, on a daily basis, am all over the place. In my current position, I write abstracts for medical conferences. I deal with Python code debugging. I deal with AWS infrastructure, all kinds of things that are going on. And that's very typical of what you have to do in a small business. There's an endless variety of things to take on. You're never going to be pigeonholed into just being the person who does task X at the company. You're going to have a lot of opportunity there. And that's the next part down here, the opportunity to do things and stretch. There is a lot to do. If you are willing to step up and take on a job, or to take on a need in the company, there's usually a good way for you to do that. And you will be able to use that in future careers or on your resume to get those next positions, because you stepped up and you learned it and you made it happen. And that's far more valuable than having gone to a class or going through a training and never having actually had an opportunity to implement it. We work directly and closely with everyone. And you can imagine in this company of size to 10 to 20, most oftentimes we've had an all hands meeting every week and we talk to everybody. I would routinely talk to all job functions on a given week. That's great, and it's a close team, and you celebrate wins together and you celebrate losses together. And it's much better, for example, than being at a consulting company where you help enable a solution and then the team goes off and celebrates without you. The last two here I think are super important as well. So small companies are going to have lots of constraints. There are hard budget constraints, hard people constraints, hard delivery timeline constraints. And that usually, or people who are very successful in working for small companies, means that you have to be creative in figuring out how you're going to overcome those constraints to deliver something. I find that working under constraints, as opposed to feeling constraining, feels very freeing, because you know that you need to propose solutions that work there. And you're not expected, because there's constraints, you can't expect that you're going to deliver the world. You're going to deliver the best thing you can given those constraints. And it really is inspiring as an engineer to deal with those sort of systems. And then the one that most people focus on when they think about startups is the large potential upside in terms of money. Yes, some startups are able to go on and be sold, acquired, or go through an initial public offering and make money. And that is a potential upside. But it really leads me into the sort of not so great things about working for small companies. So all these things that are positives, unfortunately, also have a downside. And we'll start at the bottom here. That large potential upside in terms of money also means that you're probably dealing with a less economically stable company. There's less stability there. And so that, from year to year, that company may have to raise money. If they fail to raise money, they'll have to shut down. And that happens. I've been a part of companies that shut down. It's not fun. And all of that potential upside disappears in an instant. And that's something that you have to deal with. It's a higher risk, but potentially higher reward company. Let's go back up here to value and getting things done. That's very, very true, but it also means that a lot of these startup companies are sort of always in a sort of low-level crisis mode. There's always this discussion, whether it's direct and frank or it's behind the scenes, that, hey, if we don't meet milestone X by the end of this year, or we don't get customer Y by the end of this quarter, we won't be able to raise money. And that's very, very true. It's not been the primary driver of my career or the primary thing that I've had to worry about, but it's always in the background. Flexible working conditions means it's great. They're going to allow you to be flexible, but it means that there's probably more of an expectation that you're never not working. Being reachable anywhere, expecting that you're going to work from your house or you're going to work from your remote location means that there's a little bit of an expectation built in that they're going to ask you to do things there. Now, I don't do that to my employees, but this is sort of the norm that I've seen and experienced over time. A lot of variety of tasks. Again, it's great, but those tasks may not be aligned with your career trajectory. In a recent company I've worked with, we experienced a downsizing, and that meant a lot of people sort of at the senior or managerial level, instead of developing managerial skills, were suddenly working on introductory skills for their job title and doing a lot of things that they did 10 or 20 years ago in their career. That's fine. It gets the company, to the next stage. It gets the company moving forward. But if you're trying to actually have a career trajectory in managerial areas or in, being a principal engineer, you will not have that track record to be able to pull that off. And so that could be a problem. And similarly, with the lots of opportunities to stretch, there's little ability to develop deep skills. If you said, I want to deep dive into the ability, in my example, to work on a certain type of machine learning model, and I just want to know the ins and outs of it and how it works and how it applies to our problem, you probably won't have the opportunity to get that deep. You might be able to try it, and if it works, you can continue to try it. But the second that it doesn't produce value on a day-to-day basis, you'll probably have to drop it. And so you'd have to do that on your own time or in other ways or areas, and that may not be as satisfying and may not be as possible. Working directly with everyone, you will hear a term that we're all family here being a big red flag in terms of what you do when you join a company. And I probably would echo that. It's great to have great working relationships, but if there's an expectation that you need to work extra hard because you're letting your other people at the company down, that's kind of a negative psychological control that the company tries to use. And similarly, trying to convince you to continue to work for them or to work in certain ways. There's a lot of negatives around that. Yes, it's great to have a close team. Yes, it's great to celebrate wins. It also means it's that much harder when some of the company gets let go or when people are falling down and you're being asked to make up for that. Similarly, constraints are great. They inspire a lot of creativity. I love them. But at some level, I need people and money to be able to implement some solutions. Those are harder to come by at small companies. And we already talked about the less stable. So let me talk. The one thing I wanted to make sure that I got to here was this, how you should evaluate an offer from a small medtech company. This is the question that I get the most from people in this area and how they should do this. And I have some very practical advice here. Again, this is my personal advice. You have to understand how this works for you. But usually in an offer from a medtech company, you're going to see these things laid out. The location of your job, your salary, your stock options if they're pre-IPO, pre-acquisition, your job title, the reporting structure, the job description, and the benefits. I want to talk you through these things and help you understand which of these things you should more carefully understand and value, and which of these things maybe aren't that important in terms of evaluating a job offer. Hopefully all of you guys get great offers and they're always great companies, and this isn't anything you ever have to deal with, but here's some very practical advice. Location has to work for you and your family. Don't move to take an opportunity that you think is awesome in a small company if you can't imagine yourself having a successful life there. As we pointed out, small companies rise and fall all the time, and you don't want to be stuck somewhere where you have no social network and you have no family help after a job collapses, because it's very hard, to pick yourself back up after that company after the company you put all of your time and effort into collapses. So make sure that the location works for you and your family. Salary, I think, is a very important one. And of course, it's a little bit taboo to talk about salary, but salary is a yardstick, for better or worse, that will determine basically your whole trajectory of your career. You should fight very hard on your first offer to make sure that that salary is as high as possible. And I know this sounds super crass and super uncomfortable to talk about, but every time there's an opportunity for you to advance, or every time that there's a sort of promotion or an increase, all of that's going to be figured from a percentage of your salary. Any sort of bonuses are going to be figured as a percentage of your salary. In fact, any sort of thing that is at all based on money at your company is going to be a percentage of your salary. And so fighting for a 1% increase now, every time you get a 6% increase or something year over year, that 1% you fought for in the beginning is going to be a big multiplier over and over again. This is it's just the way things go. At your next job, when they ask you what you made before, you probably don't tell them, but if you get into it, that salary actually immediately in their mind gives them an idea of what level you are and how much your company valued you. I understand, again, how crass and terrible this sounds, but it's the reality of what to do. And it's what I tell everybody to negotiate upfront, because it's the most important thing. Stock options. Twice I've been presented with offers that had a salary and then a stock option number given. If you're not familiar with stock options, they're not actual stocks. They're options to buy stock in the company. Usually you are given a grant at the beginning of a certain number of options that just says you have the possibility in the future of being able to purchase this many stocks in our company. They'll give you a number. It'll be the number of stocks. It'll seem amazingly high, but will have literally no meaning, and I'll explain why in just a second. Then there'll be a vesting schedule. This is typically that until you work there for a year, you have no right to purchase options. After a year or sometimes 2 years, you'll be able to purchase an initial chunk of those, and then either monthly, quarterly, or yearly thereafter, you get the rest of them until in 4 or 5 years, you have the ability to purchase all of them. And then they also need to give you a strike price, which is basically if you want to buy those options today, this is what they cost you. So what you're sold about stock options is, hey, this company is going to be really successful. You're getting it on the ground floor. You're able to purchase, say 10,000, 20,000 shares of our company for 50 cents a piece today. And when we're bought later and we're worth $1 billion, you'll make all of this money off those stock options. And that has happened for some Silicon Valley companies. It has happened for some early stage biotech companies that had a technology that just needed to scale. But what I've seen happen, not only in my experience, but in other companies' experience, is that oftentimes to make the deal happen, to get the company acquired or purchased, that a lot of that common stock just gets wiped away. They literally take it all away. And if you have exercised some of those options, it all goes to zero. So what I literally tell people who are applying to my group is that you should feel like stock options are a lottery ticket. It's great that you have a lottery ticket, but you can't expect that it has the expected value of that lottery ticket is zero. So you should not evaluate your job offer given those stock options. Again, this is my opinion, but this is what I've told people joining my team as far as I remember. It's great. It's a great commitment to the company. Don't let the company convince you that by accepting more options and less salary that you're a more dedicated employee or that you'll be more valued. You're here to work for the company, make great things happen, deliver great products, and don't worry too much about the stock options, worry about the salary. Same thing with job title. I will tell you that I've had the job title of Chief Data Scientist, Vice President of Data Science, Director of Data Science, and now I'm a Senior Director of Computational Science. All of those were totally valid titles. They totally explain where I was in the company. But when you look at the size of the company versus the title, you really realize where my trajectory is going. And despite the fact that maybe my titles went down, the size of the company went up. And so the importance was still growing. Yes, get the job title that you think you deserve. Yes, within that company, that job title is going to be very important. But don't expect that if you get a chief position as your first position out of the gate at a size 4 company, that's going to mean something when you try to apply to size 4,000 company. It just doesn't, it looks good on LinkedIn, but it doesn't necessarily translate to how you're going to move forward with your career. Reporting structure is important. Make sure that you report to a manager that you trust and that you can learn something from. Don't report to somebody that you don't trust or you don't think you can learn something from. Don't immediately sign up to have people under you either. You need to learn how to work on a job and what to do. So make sure that you understand the reporting structure. Make sure that the job description matches what you think you want to do. Understand that, especially at a small company, that your job description today is great, but you could be asked to do anything tomorrow. And then make sure that those benefits are something that's going to work for your family. So I've given a lot of my thoughts and advice here, and I think we're about to where we want to be in terms of asking some questions and answering some questions for you. Again, these are my disclaimers again, but I'm happy to talk about all of these things, none of these things. Any questions you have, I'm happy to answer, and thanks for listening.